Hello there, my lovely jewelry makers. I'm Christina of CSLdesigns, and in today's tutorial I'm going to show you how to make these classy wirework Christmas trees. They're also pretty quick, so make a perfect last minute Christmas present. So if you'd like to see more free tutorials like this, please feel free to like, share and subscribe to my channel. And if you want to help support me, there's also a super thanks button below the video. Otherwise, if you want to learn how to make these classy but super easy wirework Christmas trees that can be used for jewelry, decorations or anything else you can think of, then keep watching. So these are the materials that we'll need. Now the wire that I'm using is a regular round silver coated copper wire, and the first gauge here is a 1.25mm, so that's a thick gauge and it's going to be our base wire. And then I'm using a 0.3mm wire, and this is really going to be used to add in the beads with. Now you can of course play around with the gauges of wire that you want to use. This is just going to be what I'm demonstrating with. Then as for the beads, I'm using these 3mm rounds. The specific ones I'm using are blue coated faceted hematite gemstone beads, but of course you can use whatever you want to. And you can also use different sizes of beads depending what suits your piece. And then of course we also need some findings, so I'm using some earring posts and butterfly backs and a couple of jump rings to help put it together, because I'm going to turn these into some earrings. But of course you can use them for whatever you want to, so just get the findings that you need for yours. Now we just need some tools as well, so of course we need our flush cutter so we can cut our wire, chain nose and tweezer nose pliers to help manipulate the wire and for the jump rings. And finally, it can be helpful having something like a pair of 6-step bell making pliers or round nose pliers if we need help making any loops or curves. But anyway, you can find the material list and useful links in the description box down below. Otherwise, let's get it all ready and let's get started. Then to get our wires ready, we need to cut some lengths. So first of all, I have a length here of the 1.25mm of about 35cm, and just make sure it's nice and straight so it doesn't have any kinks in it. And then we also need a length of a 0.3mm here of about 180cm. So this is going to be used to add the beads in. So we're going to start out with our base wire here, and we're going to start from the top, working our way down the tree basically. So I'm just going to be getting out my 6-step bell making pliers here to help make the first loop. So we're going to make the very smallest loop that's going to be at the top. So towards one end of the wire, just place your pliers, and then we basically want to create a bit of a teardrop shape here. And obviously how big you make your loops will then determine as well how large your final piece is going to end up being. So we end up with something a bit like that. So this is our very top loop, and then we're going to work our way downwards, like I said, gradually making the loops larger and larger as we go. So I'm going to start working on the next loop, and you can also just use your hands and fingers for the most part. So you want to start on this side here and then bring in the wire around to the other side, and then roughly get it down to the size it's going to be, and then bring the wire back over itself and start creating that loop. And then of course you can take your time and adjust it however you need to until it has the look that you're happy with. And also, if you're just making the first one, of course you can just make it how you want it to, but say if you're making a pair of earrings and you want them to be as symmetrical and similar as possible, you can always, once you've made the first one, go in and use that basically as a reference point to then compare the current one you're making to. So I can see I need to make this a bit smaller. So just keep working at that. And then because I already have that one finished and I want to make this a pair of earrings, like I said, I can just keep referring back to that one, comparing the two, and just needs to be a little bit smaller still. And you can also then go in and use your 6-step bell making pliers or round nose pliers to help adjust the size and shape of this, because it can sometimes be a little bit difficult with your hands and fingers, especially around here where we're making the smaller loops. So let's try around something like that, and this looks pretty good. So I can move on from here and start making the third one, and you basically keep doing this and just keep doing it in the same direction. So I'm going to be bringing the wire in position to start making that next loop, so bring it around towards the opposite side here, and then bring it over the top of itself to make that next teardrop shape or loop, whatever you want to call it. And then we just need to work on the size and the shape of it until we're happy with it. And again, of course, if you already have one you can compare to, you can just do that. So checking that third one, and I feel like they're matched pretty nicely. I can move on and make the next one, and you just basically want to keep doing this until you have the full tree that you're happy with. Again, the size is also completely up to you, so you can stop at any point. So of course the amount of loops that you make will determine also how large it is, so how tall the tree is basically. So I now have my 5 loops here, and if we turn it, we can kind of see the effect that it's going to give. So the tree where it's at the top, smallest, then of course gets wider and wider towards the bottom. Now what we just need to do is finish off this end. So for this one, I'm just going to finish it off and have a bottom part of the tree that we're not going to add a loop to. So to do that, I'm just going to bring this wire around as if we were going to do another loop, but this time I'm making it tighter down here and then bringing it over the top of the other loop still. And then we just want to basically look at it and judge how we feel it's going to sit and end up looking. So I'm just going to have this come across and create this little loop down here that's going to be about the same level as the large teardrop shape there, the last one we made. And then of course you can also keep comparing it to the other one. So I just want to kind of make it actually a little bit smaller. But then you can go in and basically cut off the excess here, because obviously we have this wire end coming across that we don't want. So what we want to do is cut off this end where it's crossing over the wire of itself on that large loop. And I'm going to take the back of my cutters and put them just on the other side of where the wire is that's going underneath. So basically where this wire is going to end up running into itself, and then just cut that like that. We got rid of that, and then you can see that this end is going to end up butting up against the side of itself. So basically it's going to go like that, and that gets rid of it as well. So it's not going to be catching or scratching on anything. And at the top we're going to basically do the same thing, just finish off this loop by cutting off the excess. And this time I'm going to cut it so it finishes on the inside of the loop. So something a bit like that. Cut that off, get rid of the excess. And then it's going to butt up against the side of itself once we just push it down flat. Just similar as the bottom one. And this is basically the finished shape of our tree. Now of course you can easily leave it like this if you just like the way that looks without any beads. You can then also go in and just strengthen this a little bit if you need to. So for instance, you could get something like a steel block and a jewellery hammer here, and then just do a little bit of hammering on the piece. You don't have to go hard in, but just gently hammer across your wire here, and that will help strengthen up the piece. And you can also use something like this, that's a wire whacker. You basically have 2 separate parts and you put the piece in between, and then you basically whack them together a little bit. Again, don't have to go too over excessive, just something that gives the piece a little bit more strength if you feel like it's necessary. But if you then want to add beads in, that's why we need to get our 0.3mm wire ready. So I've got the length, and then what I'm going to do is put the 2 ends together here so we can find where the midpoint is. And I have that roughly there, so just keep hold of that, because we're then going to use each of these lengths to go down either side of the tree. So this is going to actually start at the top of the tree. So first of all we need to attach it. So I'm going to keep hold of the midpoint there and just grab one of the ends. Then I'm going to go through the very top loop and pull it all the way through to where the midpoint is. And then all we need to do is start wrapping this around so we can attach it. You can just take the other end and kind of put that out of the way for now so we don't get tangled up. But then just keep going back to the end and bringing it through that little loop. And then you're basically making wraps or coils around the base wire. And we're just going to do a few here, working our way across, and just make sure that your wraps are nice and tight next to each other. You can always, if you need to, use a pair of pliers to help push them tight together. But then what I'm going to do is wrap across the top here and work my way down to where we have the first kind of indentation into this side. And I personally prefer to start on this side here. That's basically the tip of the teardrop shapes or the bottom of the loops, depending how you look at it, if you hold it like this, of course. Now if you find that as you're weaving and you get to the point where the end of the wire is, it's a little bit tight and you can't really get the weaving wire past there, all you can do is just open it up while we're weaving, and then just keep going, like I said, down towards where that first crossover point is. And once you then reach that point, we can just close back up that top loop again. There we go. Then it's time to start adding in our beads. So you just want to have them ready and just take one at a time. So I'm grabbing my bead and then adding it to the end of the wire that I'm working with, letting it drop all the way down to my piece here. And then you can see that's going to just sit perfectly in that little kind of corner we created with the crossover point. But then we need to then go from this side of that loop to the other side, and I'm going to continue in the direction that I'm weaving. So it's coming out over the top of the wire. That means I need to go underneath the next one. And the reason that I prefer starting on this side here is because we can then use the openings on the other side to weave in between the loops here, which is much easier than having to constantly go to the end and feed it through like that. Whereas if we start on the other side and add our beads, we're going to close that off. Of course, there's no right or wrong, it just makes it a little bit easier. And if you find that this is a little bit too tight, it can maybe affect this weaving wire that we're weaving with because it's so thin. You can always just push them apart a little bit, so we create a bit more of an opening while we're then weaving. So here I've added my first bead. We're going to then keep wrapping our weaving wire around this base wire until we get to that next crossover point, and then we can add our next bead in, which is where we are now. So before I add the bead, I can just close this back up again and then get the end of my wire ready. Grab the next bead, add it onto the wire, let it drop all the way down to sit right in that little corner, and then again we can just go from this side of the loop to the other side and then continue. And remember, if you need to, you can always just open it up a little bit and then just wrap that wire in place so that just traps the bead in that little corner. And you just continue like this all the way down to the bottom. And now work my way all the way down here. I've added all the beads on this side. You can see I don't have any more space to add them, but then I've ended up down here on the last little kind of curve that we made, and also where the wire ends. So all you want to do is continue wrapping, and again you can just open up that end a bit to give the space to just bring the weaving wire here right through, instead of having to weave in the end every time through the opening. And then you just want to keep wrapping this all the way around, close to where the wire actually ends that we cut it off. And once we then weaved it almost all the way to where the end of the wire is, and also you can close that wire back up, we just want to go in and cut off the excess. And I'm just going to cut it so the end of the weaving wire here, once we then take our pliers and flatten that down, it's going to then end up on the inside. That way it's not on the outside and more likely to catch and scratch on something. Now once we've then done that one side, it's time to go back up to the top and basically move down the other side and do the same thing. Now here of course we'll have the other end of the loops or the teardrop shapes that we made, but it's the same principle. So first of all, we need to get this wire down to where we have the first little gap, moving from one teardrop shape to the next, where we're then going to fit in a bead. So we just want to get our wire to that point. So then once I'm there, I can have my wire ready and then grab a bead, add that and let it drop all the way down. And you can see that's going to sit in that little corner there. And then we just want to continue our wraps in the same direction. So I'm going to go down through the next teardrop shape there and just gently pull it all the way through. And then just make sure the bead is going to stay in that little corner as I'm then wrapping the wire around the next teardrop shape and basically fastening it in place. And then you can probably tell we just want to then wrap on the top of this teardrop shape over to the other side of it, where we then have another little gap that we can add a bead to, and then just keep going like that on this side all the way down to the bottom. Once we then reach the largest loop here, we then just want to continue wrapping our wire around that base wire all the way along until we basically end up meeting up where the end of the wire is and where we finished off with the other weaving wire as well. We can at that point go in and cut off the excess little tail here. Again, just make sure we leave just a tiny little end that we can then go in and squeeze down with our pliers and just kind of continue the wrap. So we're tucking the end out of the way just like we did before. And then we've finished off adding our beads to the tree. Now I just want to show you what you can also do. So on the bottom here, as we're finishing off the base wire, you can bring it around like we were doing before. But if you want to say add a dangle to the bottom, we can just add a little loop in as well, instead of just finishing off the wire like I showed you before. So just bring the wire through in towards the middle there, and then we can take our 6-step bell making pliers or round nose pliers, whatever you're using, and basically use the end here and make a loop instead of just cutting it off. And then we can just go in and cut off the excess and just cut it right where the loop basically starts to overlap itself. So like that, get rid of that. And of course we just need to flatten the loop out And then you have a loop on the bottom of the tree that you can then use to add a dangle to as well. So that's also just another option for you. But then otherwise all that's left is attach our findings. So I'm just going to grab a jump ring. Of course we just need to open it up. And then I'm going to put this through the very top loop, so the smallest one you could say as well. And then before closing it, I'm also going to add in my earring finding, or of course your chain or anything else that you're using it for. And then you just want to close it back up. And then you have, in this case, your earring ready to wear. And of course you just want to repeat with the other one as well. So that is how you make these classy wirework Christmas trees that you can use for whatever you want to, whether that's jewellery, decoration, or anything else you can think of, but that are easy enough that literally anyone can make them. And they're nice and quick to make as well, so they do also make the perfect last minute present, just in case you need that. But if you like Christmas themed jewellery, I do have a whole playlist full of them, so I'm going to leave a link to that in the description box down below. You can check that out. Otherwise, I really hope you enjoyed this one. I hope you have a great Christmas. Thank you so much for watching it, and I'll see you in the next one.